In this presentation, we will start putting together the financial statements from the adjusted trial balance, starting with the balance sheet, starting with the assets of the balance sheet. For more accounting information and accounting courses, visit our website at accountinginstruction.info. This is going to be coming from the adjusted trial balance. Note what tab we're on. We're on the financial statements tab. These numbers here on the financial statements tab for the adjusted trial balance are coming from the prior tab, our adjusting entries. So if we go to the adjusting entries, remember we had this unadjusted trial balance. We entered the adjustments. We now have the adjusted trial balance. These then are numbers that are close as possible to being completely accrual-based numbers. And therefore, those are the ones we're going to use to make the financial statements. So on the next tab then, going back to the financial statement tab, all we're doing are picking up those same numbers here. So we're just picking them up from the adjusting entries tab. And then we're going to use those to create the financial statements. So as we do this, note that we want to keep in mind that this adjusted trial balance is in balance. It's a representation of the double entry accounting system in the format of debits and credits. Meaning debits are non-bracketed, credits are bracketed, debits are positive for Excel, credits are negative for Excel, and that means that the debits minus the credits equal 0, or they're the same. Debits equal the credits. That's the same thing in theory as the double entry accounting system being represented in terms of the accounting equation. As we can see here, assets equal the liabilities, just picking up these numbers, and equity. So the accounting equation is in balance. And note that the balance sheet is just another representation of the accounting equation. So the balance sheet is assets, liabilities, and equity. So that means that these, because they're in balance, because the debits equal the credits, it has to work that the accounting equation will be the same. And if the accounting equation works, then it has to work that the balance sheet will work. So as long as we know that, then we can go forward as easily as possible. And if there's an error, something goes wrong, we can still be assured that it works. We just need to figure out what happened in order to fix whatever problems there may be. Now the financial statements will consist of the balance sheet, the income statement, and the statement of stockholders' equity. When putting together the financial statements, you'll often be advised to start with the income statement and then do the statement of equity and then the balance sheet. We're actually going to start here on the balance sheet, and there's a couple different reasons. I'll just give a quick explanation on why. One, the traditional method would say that we need the income statement, net income, from the income statement in order to create the statement of equity, because it's part of the statement of equity. And the statement of equity is needed in order to fill out the balance sheet equity portion. And that's true to some degree. However, on my argument on the balance sheet, to start with the balance sheet, especially if you're using Excel, is that we can then go to the trial balance top to bottom, meaning it's just like the accounting equation, assets, liabilities, and equity. And so to me, for learning it for new learners and just to be putting something together, it's kind of easier to start at the thing that is the accounting equation, is the big picture, is the point in time, and work from top to bottom, assets then liabilities. So that's why I like to start on the balance sheet. Now, the problem with that is that when we get to the equity section, of course, all of this is equity. But if you have, so we know what total equity is, in other words, it's all of this put together. We'll get there when we get to the equity section. But notice Excel will give us the summary, at least, of what equity is if we just highlight these and we have it formatted in this way, meaning credit plus the credit minus the debit plus the credit minus debit minus debit minus debit minus the debit gives us the 105,600. So we don't really need to calculate this on the income statement and the statement of equity, at least to know the total of all of equity if our Excel sheet is formatted well. All we have to do is highlight the cells and say, okay, it's 105,600. So for that reason, the traditional argument that we need to do the income statement first so we can get to net income, so that we can then use that to make the statement of equity, so that we can then know what this equity number is, doesn't really fit, because we can easily know what the equity number is, at least in total, by just highlighting these and seeing what it adds up to. And therefore, I think it's easier to go from top to bottom when that is the case. And start looking at the big picture. So that's what we'll do here. We're going to start and we're just going to find a home for all of these numbers. We're going to start from the assets on the balance sheet. Remember that the balance sheet is as of a point in time, in this case as of the end of the month of January 31st. Only one date, doesn't have a date range, doesn't have a beginning and an end. We're not talking about activity, we're not talking about performance. We're just talking about where do we stand as of the end of the month. Okay, so we're going to start with the assets. We're going to find a home for all of these green accounts under the assets section. Once we do, if we highlight these, it should add up to 119,100. Be careful that we have one contra asset, one asset that has a credit balance, that being accumulated depreciation. So that'll trick us. That's decreasing our total here. Okay, so all we're going to do is we're going to say assets. We're going to start with current assets. We typically break out current assets, those being more liquid type assets, assets closer to cash. So for example, if we just go top to bottom, cash, is that a current asset? Yes, it is. It's very liquid. So we could do this a couple ways. I could copy cash. I'm going to try to use formulas as much as possible. So we're going to put our cursor in cell G5 and just say equals and point to that name cash and enter. So that's going to be part of our journal entry here. Now notice it's already indented for us. Home tab alignment, we indented here. Then accounts receivable, is that a current asset? It's going to be a current asset, so I'm just going to say this equals the accounts receivable. And we'll just go straight down the list. Supplies, current asset, yep, equals supplies. The next one says prepaid rent. And the thing about that is we don't really need prepaid rent because it's 0. So we can leave that blank because there's nothing there. Prepaid insurance, is that current? We're going to say, yeah, that's current. So we'll take prepaid insurance. And then equipment, is that current? And we're going to say no, the equipment actually is not current. And so we will stop here. Now I'm going to add a couple subtotals. I'm going to skip a line here just because this cell is formatted down here for total current assets. We could move this all up one, but I'm going to keep it where it's at. So we've got the total current assets here, and that's going to be the sum up of all these assets. So I'm going to put my cursor in H5 now. We'll just pull over the numbers now. So note we have 2 columns. We're not having 2 columns because it's a debit and credit column. We do have 2 columns because we're just going to put the subtotal, the numbers that we're going to subtotal on the left, and then we will pull out that subtotal, summing them up on the right. So remember, no debits and credits here. That's the point of the financial statements. We don't want debits and credits because people don't know what they are and therefore can't read it. Notice how much more bulky what we're putting together is than this. This is actually easier to read if we understand debits and credits, or it's faster to just, okay, what's total assets? We can just highlight, there it is, 119,100. You know, what's property, plant, and equipment? There it is, 59,000. So this may be a quicker format. That's the point of debits and credits, but we don't want to have to try to explain debits and credits to people. So we're going to put it in a more bulky but useful plus and minus format. That's the point. So now to do that, we're in cell H5. We're going to say this equals this 36,100 and enter. And we're just going to do this for accounts receivable equals the 8,000 and enter. We'll do the same for supplies equals the 5,000 and enter. And then prepaid insurance, we're going to have to skip a line. We'll say equals that 11,000 and enter. Now you may be saying, hey, I could do that easier by just copying and pasting the cells, and you can. So I'm just going to show you that real quick. I'm going to delete these just to show us. Delete. If we put our cursor on this item, we can autofill down, and it should pick up what we want. Notice it didn't pick up what we wanted here. Why? Because we had this skipped cell. So in this one, we have to say, okay, this one equals the 11. So that could be a little bit faster. I'm going to format this by going to the Home tab, Font, and let's just underline it. So there we have that. I'm going to skip a line for the total current assets just because that's how the worksheet was formatted, because originally we had the rent with a 0 in it up here. So we're going to be down here in cell I10, where we're going to use the sum function, just adding these up, equals the sum double click the sum function and add these up. So the 36,100 plus the 8,000 plus the 5,000 plus the 11,000 adds up to 60,100. So that's our total current assets. And if we check it, it's really easy in Excel. I can just highlight these and say, is that what this adds up to? 60,100 looks good. Now these two are going to be different because they're not current, meaning we can't really pay our current expenses, our current liabilities with equipment. So unless we sold it, and that would be the exception. That'd be tough to do though. So we have to put these out in a separate area. We call that property, plant, and equipment, or fixed assets, or depreciable assets, something like that. And we'll break this out there. So we're going to say here, I'm just going to say equipment's going to be under property, plant, and equipment. Notice the formatting here. When we have the header, we got assets, and then current assets colon, meaning it's going to be a separate category for current assets, and we're going to indent them. So, and that'll show that these are all within the category of current assets. We'll pull them into the inner column and then sum that out to the outer column. So we'll do the same thing here. We got equipment, and then we have the accumulated depreciation. Now I'm going to abbreviate this a little, and I'm going to put the words less ACC, accumulated depreciation, rather than just saying equals this, because one, I want to tell our reader it's a subtraction problem, and two, it'll fit a little bit easier. Accumulated depreciation obviously is a long word. So then we're in the office equipment, or the equipment here, we're just going to say this equals, point to that 60,000 and enter, and then we'll go less accumulated depreciation. Now I typically don't put the negative sign here because this represents a credit here. And over here we could put a negative, meaning it's a subtraction problem, but we could also just keep it as the 1,000 and use the term less to show it's a subtraction problem. So to flip the sign then, I'm going to say instead of equals, I'm going to say negative of this number, taking that number and flipping the sign. Then we'll have total property, plant, and equipment. Total property, plant, and equipment. I'm going to bring that to the outer column, and we'll put the calculation here. So I'm going to underline this. Let's go to the Home tab, Font, and Underline. And we'll pull this out. Now I'm going to give the common error that usually happens when we mess up on calculating assets, and then we'll figure out what happened. So we're going to say equals the sum of these numbers. See if we can find the error in this. And then we're gonna sum up the total column here, which will be the outer columns. So now we've summed up these numbers, which was the first portion, and then we went down to here, and then we summed up these numbers, which that's going to give us the total of all these. So now we're just summing up the outer column. Note what we're not going to do is we're not going to be bouncing back and forth between columns, meaning when I was here, I only summed up one column. I didn't go from here and jump back to here. When here, we summed up one column. Here, we're going to sum up one column, the one right above it, because that's where the numbers are. We're not going to jump over to the left, and that's typical for financial statements, so just be aware of the formatting. And we're going to say equals SUM. Double-click that sum function and highlight those two numbers. We could just add them. Notice we have blank cells here. That's okay. And enter. And we come up to 121,100. Now I'm going to check that over here by highlighting these, and we're going to say, it comes out to 119,100. That's different. So there's a problem here. And if we look at if we subtract those out, we can say 119,100 minus 121,100, $2,000 off. Why would that be? And oftentimes it's because we went the wrong way with something. So like a debit being a credit, or a credit being a debit, or a subtraction being an adding, or adding being subtraction problem. So if I divide that by 2, then oftentimes I'll say, okay, is there a number that says 1,000? Looks like our number here says 1,000. And so that looks suspiciously like a problem. And that's because it's a subtraction problem. Now again, we could put the subtraction here. We could say a minus sign. But notice there's no real standardization in financial statements a lot of the time with a subtraction problem, because sometimes we'll say it with words. Some people will put a subtraction sign. Sometimes nothing will happen. Like on the income statement, we're just going to have revenue, and then expenses. And oftentimes it's not going to say, hey, minus the expenses out. We just are supposed to know that net income is calculated as revenue minus expenses. So here we're going to do it with words, less, meaning this sum function is wrong. We got to delete that and just do a subtraction. So in Excel, we're just going to say this equals this number minus this number. So H12 minus H13. And that'll give us the 59, and that gives us our 119. And then I can check each section as we go. We're going to say, does that make sense? 119 looks good. That looks good. I'm feeling pretty confident. I'm going to go ahead and highlight this whole area. I'm just going to make it yellow. And that's going to tell me I've found a home for all the assets. So if there's a problem, if we're out of balance at the end of the day, it's probably not the fault of the assets being put in there incorrectly. For more accounting information and accounting courses, visit our website at accountinginstruction.info.